C.S. Lewis is my favorite author of all time. He's best known for the Chronicles of Narnia. But there is a book trilogy that definitely deserves more talk, his Space Trilogy. This is my spoiler talk book review for That Hideous Strength, which is the third book, the conclusion of that trilogy, and it is absolutely epic. I'm excited to tell you about it. What's your favorite C.S. Lewis book? Let's talk in the comments. Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my spoiler talk book review for the third in the Space Trilogy, That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. I'm super excited to dive into this book and read it. Now look at this. This is book one of the Space Trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet. This is Paralandra, book two. You put them together, and they roughly equal the thickness of the third book. I mean, look at that! So that tells you these books are really, really good. This one is very fast-paced with a ton of stuff. It might open a little slow. Again, not negative. It's character building so that you can understand the arcs these characters are about to go on through the events of the story, and he does a really good job setting all of that up. But it is this thick, and it is much faster paced than the other two. Like, once it really gets started, and it gets moving. And I enjoyed the book so much. This is probably last time I read it was my fifth or sixth time reading it. I am giving it a solid A. Now, you could read this book solo apart from the other two. I don't recommend it. The book does a good enough job giving you the background you need to understand the third book by itself. But there's no point in doing it that way. Read the other two because they're incredibly good. That way you go into the third book with the experience of it. So just a quick brief summary of the other two books. What we learn is that our world is fallen. Mankind fell. And when we fell, we handed our world over to Satan and his fallen Adilla. The Adilla are the angels. And so they are bound to the earth and can't get past the orbit of the moon. That is a boundary set to them, so they can't go to deep heaven and infect the other planets and infect the other worlds. Now, out there in deep heaven, there are these archangels that rule over the other worlds. So Mars, its real name is Malacandra, and the archangel that rules over it, his name is Malacandra. He protects the planet, he protects the people and all that. Same thing with Paralandra. Paralandra is the archangel that rules over that planet where there was a new Eden and a new temptation, which that all by itself was just incredibly interesting. So the whole story of the first two books is how mankind broke the boundary of protection. How they went past the orbit of the moon and went to Malacandra. They went to Mars. Now, we're called the Silent Planet because we are cut off. When we fell, we were cut off as a protection against the other planets, but the promise is our Dark Archon will not hold our world forever, and everything will be put right. And then, since the devil can't leave our planet, what he does is he possesses a guy named Weston in the second book, and that guy becomes a bridge so that Satan got to the new Eden on Paralandra, on Venus, to try to tempt the new Adam and Eve there. They are incredible books that are just so thought-provoking. And the third book is the conclusion to all of that setup, all of the power of the heavens. But it's a conclusion to the fact that we broke that boundary. That this group in this book, the N.I.C.E., and breaking that boundary, they broke their protection. The host of deep heaven were not to cross that boundary and come to earth, but they are allowed to react to the fact that we broke that boundary. So that is the interesting thing as we dive into That Hideous Strength. One of the things that C.S. Lewis says about this book, like in his intro, he calls it a fairy tale. So when you have a fairy tale, you need a king, and you do. You have Ransom, who's our main character in the other two books. He picks up the mantle of the Pendragon, the king of Logres. I'm positive I said that wrong, but like the real unfallen England. It's very interesting, and I'll get more into that later. You have the N.I.C.E. They are the beast, the dragon that must be slayed. And fairy tales gotta have magic. Well, we have planetary angels, the supernatural, and flippin' Merlin. So yes, I think this is a very interesting modern fairy tale. And Ransom has a big role, but Ransom was the main dude of the first two books. He's not so much the main dude in this book. Like, he has a huge role, and everything he does is incredibly important. But I feel like our main characters is a married couple named Mark and Jane. And their marriage is falling apart. They're newly married, and the reason it's falling apart is they are just incredibly selfish. I mean, Jane, in a sense, is just thinking about her life independent of Mark. That getting married doesn't mean she lost her freedom, and of course it doesn't mean she lost her freedom. But what she meant by that is she wants to focus on her life apart from Mark, that she can't lose that, so she won't let go of a life separate from him. And it's the same thing for Mark. Mark is, in fact, obsessed. He's a man obsessed with being in the inner circle. And that inner circle could be anything depending on where he is. Just wherever he's at, he's got to be part of the inner circle. One of the revelations Mark has later on is that he can't enjoy anything that he actually enjoys. Like, he's never been able to enjoy anything just for itself. He's denied what he's truly enjoyed to enjoy what the inner circle enjoys just so that he could win their favor. So he's a great big old faker and pushover and all of that stuff, but both of them are not focused on their marriage. They're not focused on their life together. They're so abundantly focused on their lives apart, like their marriage is falling apart. But they also become mirror images of each other in this third book. Because Jane is a seer, so she has that gift of sight. And what ends up happening is she gets caught up with Ransom, and his company's at a place called St. Anne's. So all of this is this fictional town in England called Edgestow. It's just a tiny little college town. And so they live in this little town that has its own little university and all of that stuff. But she gets caught up with Ransom in the company at St. Anne. And so she's not a believer in God at all, but she sees the power of God in that place. She hears of Ransom's stories of being on other worlds, that there are these angelic hosts out there in the deep heaven. And so it's really about how that place begins to affect her. And so she begins to understand that she really is a seer. They're not bad dreams. They're not nightmares. They're not hallucinations. She finds the things that she dreams are actually happening. And in fact, they reveal the plans of the N.I.C.E. So her gift is actually quite powerful. But one of the cool things about her gift is she could see a little bit into the spiritual realm. And, you know, she has a few freaky encounters here and there. But her character arc is as she's at St. Anne's, truth becomes more and more unveiled to her until finally she becomes a Christian. And one of the amazing scenes is when she has that conversion. See, a lot of times you watch a Christian movie or you read a Christian book, the conversion scene when the main character has to become a Christian, it sometimes has the tendency to be very robotic and mechanical. Like, there's a formula that we have to do. Like, they have to get on their knees, they have to say a certain prayer with certain words so that the reader of our book can repeat those words. But I think what C.S. Lewis does when he writes about her conversion, he shows how powerful it actually is, because she's in this garden, and because she's a seer and she can see into that spirit realm, the truth has been working on her. And I'm going to do it no justice whatsoever. The way C.S. Lewis writes it, it's like poetry. It's beautiful the way C.S. Lewis writes about her conversion and finding the truth of God. Because basically, through the events of the book and her character arc, as it brings her to the truth, in her heart, she turns towards God as she's walking around in this garden. And in her heart, I mean, it's all inner stuff going on. It's not her saying stuff. It's inner stuff. And as she turns in her heart in belief towards God, because she's a seer, his presence shows up in the garden. And it's not like he appears and manifests in front of her or anything. And I will do no justice using my words. It's one of those things that you just have to read what C.S. Lewis wrote, because it is incredibly beautiful, her conversion experience and the presence of God that shows up in that moment. And like I said, Mark is the mirror image of that. Because he's so wanting to be in the inner circle, he's easily deceived, and he gets caught up in the N.I.C.E. So the N.I.C. catches him up, and he's falling deeper and deeper into deceit. Now here's the thing about Mark in the N.I.C.E. They know Mark is weak, and they don't really care much for him, but they know his wife Jane is a seer. They know she is a potential problem to them. So they want Mark solely for her. And so what they do is they get Mark because he's easy. And if they could get Mark, they could probably get a hold of her. And so when Mark first comes into the N.I.C.E., you have this guy, Lord Ferverstone, who is in the first book under a different name, Richard Devine. And so he's been to Mars, and he knows about this planetary stuff. So he's changed his name in this one, and he helps get Mark into the N.I.C.E. When the N.I.C.E. is buying up land from the university, they're buying up Bragdon Woods because, rumors are that's where Merlin is buried. And so they're buying up the woods, they're buying up university property because the N.I.C.E., and I'll talk more about it, they're starting to take over this little town. And so the N.I.C.E. in that case is the inner circle. And so Mark is excited to be a part of it. But when he gets in there, he's part of the sociology department of his university, but they don't want it for anything sociology-like in the N.I.C.E. In fact, they won't tell him what they want from him. They leave him guessing. And he's asking all of these questions. What am I supposed to do here? Come on, people, tell me. And actually, you really feel his frustration. And you know what they do with it? He loses favor with the inner circle because he kept asking questions. Once he loses favor with the deputy director of the N.I.C.E., which every time I read the book, the way the deputy director talks, the way C.S. Lewis describes him, I picture the great Ian McShane playing that role. It's because of how Lewis describes the way he talks, the way he's kind of glassy-eyed, kind of always looking far off in the distance, yet has firm authority. Once Mark loses favor, now he's trying to get favor back. And then you have Miss Hardcastle, who's the head of the institutional police. And, she's kind of like this go-between, you've lost favor. And Miss Hardcastle is sick. She is the head of the institutional police, but she loves torture. And she particularly loves the satisfaction she gets out of torturing young women. She is incredibly sick and demented. But they all have this front. Like the N.I.C.E. spells nice. But it's hiding the true nature that is underneath under something that seems so friendly. So what they're doing is they're creating in Mark that constant need for approval. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do, so he's constantly guessing. He has so many questions that he's out of favor. Well, now he's got to win their favor back, so he does by doing whatever they tell him to do. So they're creating in him a constant need for them. And so it's very interesting, like a drug, how they create that need in him and how easy it is. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to win Mark over with that. So we see Mark falling deeper and deeper into deceit as we see Jane walking deeper and deeper into the truth. And so their character arcs are actually pretty incredible. And Mark finds the truth to a degree. It's not like he converts to Christianity by the end of the book, but what you see is the N.I.C.E. hates absolute truth. They hate absolute morality. They hate the idea that there could be absolutes. And Mark gets so fed up with them, especially when he gets framed for murder and thrown into their private jail, all of this part of a thing to make him trust them for his freedom, for his life, for everything. He gets so sick of it, he wants to go back to normal. But C.S. Lewis is capitalizes normal with a capital N, representing that normal represented something absolute and something absolutely true. And so he's craving that, realizing he's in deceit. And so inwardly, he starts rejecting all the stuff they're trying to teach him, but outwardly, he starts to walk it out because, well, he does want to get out of their jail. He doesn't want to go to real jail. He doesn't want to be framed for murder, but inwardly, you really see him start to grow up. And that's one of the interesting things about Mark. He's a total wuss. He is a man without a chest. In other words, he's not a man. All the while, you want this guy to just man the frack up. Seriously. It's like, what are you doing, boy? Wake up! But C.S. Lewis also writes him in such a way you care about him and you actually want him to have that growth. So it's very cool as the story unfolds, watching Mark and Jane grow in the telling of the story through the crazy events that happen. Now, the N.I.C.E., they are the dragon to be slain. They are actually quite frightening. So here on kind of a shallow social level, what they want is control. So they've come into this tiny little town of Edgestowe, and really what they want is all of England. And what they want beyond that is all of the world. And beyond that, oh yeah, they want even more. They really want to rule everything. But it's beginning here in this town of Edgestowe because of the woods where Merlin is buried. But we'll get to that in just a second. Really what we see is the N.I.C.E. wants to do to this small town what they've done to Mark. They want the town seeking the N.I.C.'s approval. They want the town having reliance and dependence on the N.I.C.E. on every level. So the N.I.C.E. comes in looking nice. They come in looking good. They look like they're organized. They're a progressive element. They have science behind them, and science to help take humanity to the next level. And it's very vague, whatever that means. And then one of those ways that they want to better mankind is concerning prisoners. Because when police arrest somebody, they go to court and they're sentenced, that's punishment. But they hate that term punishment. I mean, punishment just sounds cruel, right? And so take away that term and let's call it remedial treatment. So if the institutional police arrest somebody, they go into remedial treatment, which just sounds like what? Re-educating somebody to be able to go into society and have a functional role. I mean, they play with those terms, and so it sounds good. But in reality, the term punishment, it's a sentence. It'll begin here and it will end there. It's something that has a beginning and an end. Remedial treatment does not. And it's a cover for the experiments they really want to do, unlimited, for an unlimited amount of time, whatever they want to do. So using nice terminology to cover something dark that they actually want to do. And then what they end up doing is bringing more people into this small town. And the town starts to get crowded. And then what they do is they begin to feed conflict between the new people coming in and the people that have lived there all of their lives. And as they begin to feed conflict, they see that the conflict begins to snowball and have a gravity of its own. They're like, wow, the people are eating all of this up far faster than we thought. Because one of the things they want is to really rule the town. So the town can't have its own police force. That must be gone. It must have the institutional police. So do you know what they do? They plan a riot. So they have the riot, they have the date set, and then they go to Mark. Mark, who is always trying to win their approval. It turns out Mark is actually a pretty talented writer. So they want to use him to write newspaper articles before the riot, about the riot, so that the narrative for the riot will already be written and it will already be controlled. No matter how the riot goes, everything will already have a specific narrative. And as Miss Hardcastle really spells out to Mark, the whole purpose of this is to go to left newspapers and incite them against the right and make them fearful of the right. And then to go into the right's newspapers and incite them against the left and make them fearful of the left. This was written in the 40s! And you can guess, the whole sinister goal of this is fear and division. So nobody trusts anybody, and their reliance will be on the N.I.C.E. That's why, as Miss Hardcastle says, we can't be political. Whatever. The idea is to get everybody divided against themselves and everybody fearful of everybody else, and then they rely on the N.I.C.E. And in fact, the narrative that they wrote, it was the institutional police that did what the local police could not and actually brought order. And so therefore, this becomes an event for the N.I.C.E. to take a step in and continue to control more. Now let's get deeper into the N.I.C.E. because it's not just the social stuff they want the world and they want the universe. So it all goes so much deeper than all of that. Now, like I said, what the N.I.C.E. hates is the idea of objective truth, objective morality, the idea that there is an absolute of anything. And one of the things is they hate emotion. They hate emotion because of that, because it's like, well, we're all taught to have certain emotions and certain feelings about certain things, meaning there's an absolute, so it's okay to have emotions. So they don't like emotions. They find emotions to be these horrible, embarrassing chemical reactions. They ought to be belittled and removed. And so what they want to do is create artificial men. They want to take the human out of humanity and take away the chemical reaction of emotions. And really what they're seeking to do is to conquer nature. Nature is the ladder we have climbed up by. Now we kick her away. It is for the conquest of death, for the conquest of organic life, if you prefer. They are the same thing. They find actually nature and organic life incredibly messy. You know, back to those stupid, messy emotions. How horrible that we humans have feelings about things. They take it as a sign that we think there's something objective out there, and they don't want it. There is no objective right. There is no objective wrong. There is no reason to have strong emotions and feelings about that stuff one way or the other. So what we are going to do is create artificial men, by which we could take our consciousness, move it over there to that artificial thing, and conquer death and live on, but live on superior. And it's interesting because they have something they look up to. The moon. Okay, now we're going back to the Space Trilogy stuff. And it turns out the N.I.C.E. has gathered information there is life on the moon. And they really look up to that life. You know what that life has done? Under the surface, a great race, further advanced than we. An inspiration, a pure race. They have cleaned their world, broken free almost from the organic. They retain their intelligence. They keep it artificially alive after the organic body has been dispensed with. A miracle of applied biochemistry. They do not need organic food, you understand? They are almost free of nature, attached to her by only the thinnest, finest cord. The side that faces us, that's the fallen side. And what they've done is they have destroyed all organic life. The trees, the woods, the water, the atmosphere, the air, including their own organic bodies. And they've somehow, through a miracle of biochemistry, as they say in the book, they have taken their consciousness, their intelligence, and now they live on in these artificial bodies. This is everything that the N.I.C.E. wants. Now, the dark side of the moon, facing out to deep heaven, is the unfallen side of the moon. There's still trees, there's still water, there's still natural life. And so what the N.I.C.E. calls what the bad aliens are doing, they call it hygiene. All of that biological stuff, it's messy. And so what these beings on the moon are doing is they're spreading their good hygiene, and little by little, the woods, the grass, the beauty, the organic, it's slowly getting smaller and smaller on that other side of the moon. So that is what they're going for. But it's also even further what they're going for. There was this French scientist in this book, Alcasan, and he was guillotined. His head was cut off. The N.I.C. scientists are so proud because they created life after death. The head, severed from the body, lives. That guy's consciousness lives on, and he still speaks. Yeah, it's a head attached to tubes. They have a saliva tube so the mouth could be wet. They have a blood tube so that they could pump the blood at the right blood pressure, but they also cut off the top of his head so that his brain would have opportunity to grow as they stimulate his intelligence. And they're like, yeah, true. It's probably painful and an undesirable state to live in, but it is the first draft of eternal life. It is the first draft of man living beyond death. It's the first step in our conquest over death. So the head of the N.I.C.E. is literally a head. And so it's stimulated with this wisdom, and they listen to this head. And so they're excited. They're proud of their accomplishments to conquer death. But the scary thing about the N.I.C.E. and their entire philosophy, it's not just that they've come up with this gruesome, horrid way that they think conquers death. What they really want is to create God. Don't you see, Sid Strayak, that we are offering you the unspeakable glory of being present at the creation of God Almighty here in this house? You shall meet the first sketch of the real God. It is a man, or a being made by man, who will finally ascend to the throne of the universe and rule forever. They want to create God in their own image and their own likeness, who carries on their own philosophy. It's the same lie that the serpent told Eve in the garden. The serpent came to Eve in the garden and said, yeah, you can eat off the tree. No, you won't die. In fact, the day you eat of it, you will be like God, knowing the difference between good and evil. Eve and Adam were made in God's images. You will be like God. They were made in his image and likeness. They walked with him and talked with him in the cool of the morning. And Satan got them with that lie of what is God withholding from you? It's this exact lie here for the N.I.C.E. And they're buying into it hook, line, and sinker. Jesus conquered death. And conquering death and rising from the dead, we are born again. A new creation is born inside of us. That's the new species. That's the new man. We have the hope of resurrection. And here's Satan with that lie, follow me, and I will give you resurrection. I mean, it's what God has already done. but they don't believe in a single shred of it, and they're following the lie of the serpent in ways they can't even imagine. In fact, the truth is, they know they are following something. They know they are following powers greater than themselves. And they've given those powers a name. And they're proud of this. This is how they know about the moon. This is where they got their intelligence about the creatures up there. This is how they know all this. These beings they call Macrobes. And the reason they have that weird name is it's like microbes. For the longest time, these microscopic organisms, we never knew they existed. But they had been with us this entire time. It's the same thing with Macrobes. They're just larger on that greater scale and superior and intelligent. Now, here's the other interesting thing about Macrobes. C.S. Lewis wrote about them in a different book, The Screwtape Letters. Now, The Screwtape Letters is about a demon named Screwtape, and he's writing letters to his nephew, Wormwood, who is out trying to deceive his patient who has just become a Christian. And he's trying to secure his patient's soul in hell. Now, Wormwood had written a letter to Screwtape, like, why can't I just appear to him and terrorize him? And Screwtape has a very interesting response. We are really faced with a cruel dilemma. When the humans disbelieve in our existence, we lose all the pleasing results of direct terrorism, and we make no magicians. On the other hand, when they believe in us, we cannot make them materialists and skeptics. At least, not yet. I have great hopes that we shall learn in due time how to emotionalize and mythologize their science to such an extent that what is, in effect, a belief in us, though not under that name, will creep in while the human mind remains closed to belief in the enemy, God. So what we find with the head is it wasn't any of their science that brought it back to life, but it's the Macrobes, and it's the Macrobes speaking through the head. And if in this C.S. Lewis verse, I would find it hilarious if it was Screwtape himself speaking through the head because of just how bad he wanted this. They intentionally closed themselves off to the belief in God, to the belief in absolutes, that there is an absolute truth, that there is morality. They have closed themselves off completely to that belief. They want the artificial man devoid of emotion and all of that stuff so they can just do whatever they want. And yet, they have these Macrobes, this spiritual force that they actually do believe in, but under a scientific name so that they feel good about it as they're being led by the serpent into complete terror and into complete darkness. Now, this is where Merlin comes in. And both sides, Ransom and the company at St. Anne's and the N.I.C.E., want Merlin. Merlin might sound incredibly random. Like, what is this dude doing in this story? Well, because this is, in a sense, a very interesting King Arthur story. Because it's the symbolism. It's the picture that this is presenting. Ransom is the Pendragon. He met a man, and as that man was dying, he gave him all the correct rites and ceremonies for him to carry on that name and legacy of the Pendragon. So Ransom truly does become the next king in line after Arthur, the king of Logres. Now, what does that represent? The true England. And then you have Britain, and that represents the fallen England, or the false England. The N.I.C.E. want Merlin, because Merlin belongs to an ancient order, an order that goes back before the flood in the Atlantean Circle. And so because Merlin is part of that circle, he's already opened himself up to many powers. And so in a sense, he's already open to it. And so for them, they want Merlin to connect to their Macrobes. And in connecting to their Macrobes, they want that power. The time was ripe. From the point of view which is accepted in hell, the whole history of our earth had led up to this moment. There was now at last a real chance for fallen man to shake off that limitation of his powers, which mercy had imposed upon him as a protection from the full results of his fall. If this succeeded, hell would be at last incarnate. Bad men, while still in the body, still crawling on this little globe, would enter that state which heretofore they had entered only after death, and would have the power of evil spirits. The N.I.C.E. don't understand a shred of this. All they want to do is get in touch with their Macrobes and grab a hold of that power for themselves, not even realizing that in their willful resistance of letting God in and pushing out the idea of absolute truth, they have closed their eyes and gritted their teeth and willfully walked into deception. In doing so, they have reached up into deep heaven and forced it to react. And so they took away their own barrier of protection, and so reaching up to do so, they brought down their own destruction. Ransom has a different view of Merlin. He thinks that God put Merlin in that timeless state to save Merlin's soul so that Merlin can know the true God. One of the coolest scenes in this book is when deep heaven does come to earth, when the angelic hosts that archangels over the different planets in the solar system touch down in that little room at St. Anne's. It's such a great scene for so many reasons. One, each time an angel touches down, you have the rest of the people in a different room of the house, but they're feeling the effects and the presence of these angelic beings showing up. And it's really interesting. In some ways, it's pretty funny how that happens. But you also have Merlin, and he's terrified. Because up to this point, people in his art, if people in his art ever contacted any one of the gods like Mars or Venus or anything, they're not contacting the real Mars or the real Venus. Because remember, that barrier, the lunar orbit, the fallen can't get out of it, and the unfallen aren't supposed to go through it. Therefore, when they're getting in touch with Mars, it's the fake Mars. It's not a real Mars, it's a fallen Adilla, a cheap imitation. And so that's what people of his art, if they connected with anything like that, it's an evil spirit that they connected with and not any of these angelic hosts. And when the unfallen were coming down, the real actual host, it terrified Merlin. At one point, he wanted to worship them, and Ransom said, "You stop that. They are fellow servants like you and me. You don't worship them. You worship God alone." So for the first time, the unfallen host impart their abilities to him. And then he goes into the N.I.C.E. and he uses that ability to tear it down. And so it's interesting as he does it because he goes in there and he unleashes the curse of Babel, like the Tower of Babel, where their language was confused. And it's funny because they stand up to give toast. They're toasting their own glory in this dinner party. And as they toast their own glory, they start like speaking complete rubbish. And when you're reading it in the book, it's absolutely hysterical. And then you realize what is going on, and it gets kind of frightening. And there's so much that happens, and it's just incredibly powerful, leading to the point where the town of Edgestow itself is swallowed into the ground. The N.I.C.E. and everything is swallowed into the ground. What's cool about that is when that happened, people who were living in Edgestow, all kinds of little mundane things would happen that would make them want to leave, or they just had the sudden urge to go on holiday. It was God getting them out. There are others who were trying to come home to Edgestow, and either the train didn't work or the car broke down, something, all these things that seem mundane, but really it was the miraculous intervening, protecting them from going back. In the end, this story is a fairy tale, and it shows us good versus evil, but it's also a cautionary tale. Through all of this, it illustrates to us a picture of the danger of willful blindness. Here was the N.I.C.E. railing, saying there is no absolute truth, therefore there is no lie, so we can do whatever we want and control whoever we want. Their willful blindness brought about their own destruction, as the very Macrobes that they were following were truly fallen Adilla. They were the fallen spirits that were securing their souls in hell while trying to bring about hell incarnate on the earth. The whole thing was a deception, but it was a deception they willfully entered into, gritting their teeth against everything that would save them and set them free. But I cannot tell that to this old sinner. I cannot comfort him either. He has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would hear only growlings and roarings. O Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good. So I thought that this is an incredible book, and it was an absolutely fantastic conclusion to the Space Trilogy. It did a great job illustrating God's love and showing how he changed whoever encountered him, and great character arcs for Jane and Mark, a great conclusion to Ransom and his story, all incredibly interesting. So I gave it an A. Would you go higher or lower? What did you think of that Hideous Strength? Let's talk in the comments. While you're there, hit the subscribe button to become a Durbanian. Hit the bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for my next book review, movie review, ranking video, theological analysis, trailer reaction, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.